what does the fact that Hitler took power teach you about human nature? When you look back at the history of the 20th century, what do you learn from that time?
I mean, there are a bunch of lessons to Hitler taking power. The first thing I think people ought to recognize about Hitler taking power is that the power had been centralized in the government before Hitler took it. So if you actually look at the history of Nazi Germany, the Weimar Republic had effectively collapsed. The power had been centralized in the chancellery and really under Hindenburg for a couple of years before that. And so it was only a matter of time until someone who was bad grabbed the power. And so the struggle between the Reds and the Browns in Nazism, in pre-Nazi Germany, led to this kind of up-spiraling of radical sentiment that allowed Hitler in through the front door, not through the back door. Right? He was elected.
So you think communists could have also taken power?
I mean, there's no question communists could have taken power. They were a serious force in pre-Nazi Germany.
Do you think there was an underlying current that would have led to an atrocity if the communists had taken power?
Wouldn't have been quite the same atrocity, but obviously the communists in Soviet Russia at exactly this time were committing the Holodomor.
Yeah.
Right. So there were very few good guys in terms of good parties. The moderate parties were being dragged by the radicals into alliance with them to prevent the worst case scenario from the other guy. Right. So if you look at, I'm sort of fascinated by the history of this period because it really does speak to how does a democracy break down. I mean, the 20s Weimar Republic was a very liberal democracy. How does a liberal democracy break down into complete fascism and then into genocide? And there's a character who was very prominent in the history of that time, named Franz von Papen, who was actually the second to last chancellor of the Republic before Hitler. So he was the chancellor, and then he handed over to Schleicher, and then Schleicher ended up collapsing, and that ended up handing power over to Hitler. It was Papen who had stumped for Hitler to become chancellor. Papen was a Catholic Democrat. He didn't like Hitler. He thought that Hitler was a radical and a nut job. But he also thought that Hitler, being a buffoon, as he saw it, was going to essentially be usable by the right forces in order to prevent the communists from taking power, maybe in order to restore some sort of legitimacy to the regime because he was popular, in order for Papen to retain power himself. And then immediately after Hitler taking power, Hitler basically kills all of Papen's friends. Papen, out of quote-unquote loyalty, stays on. He ends up helping the Anschluss in Austria. All this stuff is really interesting, mainly because what it speaks to is the great lie we tell ourselves is that people who are evil are not like us. They're a class apart. People who do evil things, people who support evil people, they're not like us. And that's an easy call. Everybody in history who has sinned is a person who's very different from me. Robert George, the philosopher over at Princeton, he's fond of doing a sort of thought experiment in his classes where he asks people to raise their hand if they had lived in Alabama in 1861. How many of you would be abolitionists? And everybody raises their hand. And he says, of course, that's not true. Of course, that's not true. The best protection against evil is recognizing that it lies in every human heart and the possibility that it takes you over. And so you have to be very cautious in how you approach these issues. And the back and forth of politics, the sort of bipolarity of politics, the polarization in politics might be a better way to put it, makes it very easy to kind of fall into the rock'em sock'em robots that eventually could theoretically allow you to support somebody who's truly frightening and hideous in order to stop somebody who you think is more frightening and hideous. And you see this kind of language, by the way, now predominating almost all over the Western world, right? My political enemy is an enemy of democracy. My political enemy is going to end the republic. My political enemy is going to be the person who destroys the country we live in. And so that person has to be stopped by any means necessary. And that's dangerous stuff.
So the communists had to be stopped in Nazi Germany. And so they're the devil. And so any useful buffoon, as long as they're effective against the communists, would do. Do you ever wonder, because the people that are participating in evil may not understand that they're doing evil, do you ever sit back, in the quiet of your own mind and think, am I participating in evil?
I mean, so my business partner and I, one of our favorite memes is there's a British comedy show, the name escapes me, of these two guys who are members of the SS, and they're dressed in the SS uniforms and the black uniforms with the skulls on them, and they're saying to each other, one says to the other guy, you notice like the British, the symbol is something nice, and it's like an eagle, but it's a skull and crossbones. You see the Americans, you see their blue uniforms, they're very nice and pretty. Ours are jet black. Are we the baddies? And that's it. And the truth is, we look back at the Nazis and we say, well, of course they were the baddies. They wore black uniforms, and they had jackboots, and they had this and that. And of course they were the bad guys. But evil rarely presents its face so clearly. So yeah, I mean, I think that you have to constantly be thinking along those lines, and hopefully you try to avoid it. You can only do the best that a human being can do. But yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I would say that I spend an inordinate amount of time reflecting on whether I'm doing the right thing. And I may not always do the right thing. I'm sure a lot of people think that I'm doing the wrong thing on a daily basis. But it's definitely a question that has to enter your mind as a historically aware and hopefully morally decent person.
Do you think you're mentally strong enough if you realize that you're on the wrong side of history to switch sides? Very few people in history seem to be strong enough to do that.
I mean, I think that the answer I hope would be yes. You never know until the time comes and you have to do it. I will say that having heterodox opinions in a wide variety of areas is something that I have done before. I'm the only person I've ever heard of in public life who actually has a list on their website of all the dumb, stupid things
great.
I've ever said. So where I go through and I either say, this is why I still believe this, or this is why what I said was terrible and stupid.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that list will get a lot longer.
Yeah, look forward to new additions to that.
Yeah,
list.
exactly.
Yeah, it actually is a super, super long list. People should check it out. And it's quite honest and raw.